Broadcasting live from the Business RadioX studios in Dayton, Ohio, it's time for Dayton Business Radio. Now, here's your host.
Lee Cantor here, another episode of Dayton Business Radio, and this is going to be a good one. Today we have Dr. Pamela Ellis with us, and she is with Compass Education Strategies. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Lee. I'm excited to speak with you today.
Well, before we get too far into things, do you mind telling us a little bit about Compass Education Strategies? How are you serving folks?
Sure. I will say the short of it, which is that we help teens find a college that feels like home and partner with parents to avoid overpaying. And part of that includes working not only with families, but working with schools as well as corporations.
So now let's talk about each one of those. How would you work with a corporation? That seems a little counterintuitive. Is this a benefit offered to their employees?
Absolutely, it is. And so it's working with those companies who value their employees who are parents. And we're offering employee benefits, educational services as an employee benefit to those companies. And so that's our role there. And it can include a number of ways that we're working with the parents on their behalf. And primarily now, of course, it's through virtual courses that we offer and other coaching services for employees.
But ultimately, you're going to get down to the parent and the child, right? That's where the work begins.
Yes, it is definitely so. And, interestingly enough, for many parents, especially in this environment now where they are actually homeschooling and trying to support their teens, there are so many different changes that are going on for them, and changes not only at the school level, but certainly how they're planning ahead for their kids in terms of college and helping them to reach their dreams of eventually going away to college. And so we're supporting parents with the tools and resources for how to do that.
Now, have colleges changed their kind of standards and the way that they now enroll a new student that's coming out of high school because of the pandemic and because of how the last year for these kids have been?
Well, in some ways they are. And one of those ways is in terms of, for example, testing requirements. So for a number of colleges, because of the changes within the testing landscape where ACT and SAT have canceled their recent testing dates, a number of colleges have now agreed to eliminate the need for any testing. And so that's true, like, for example, Case Western University, a great university here in Ohio, they are removing the requirement to submit ACT or SAT test scores for students in the class of 2021. And so for those juniors who are applying in the fall, they do not have to submit those scores. Now, for students who are enrolling in the upcoming months, let's say they have committed to a college for the fall, then colleges, all have certain there are going to be some differences in terms of how their curriculum will be delivered. So that's a big change that's coming up, whereas some students will be allowed to return to campus, and maybe they'll only be on campus for 1 or 2 semesters as opposed to the full year. They will have a combination of remote as well as in-person coursework, and things will just look different in many cases. And for some colleges, they're not having roommates, which is, a really big part of the whole freshman year experience, having a roommate. Students won't have roommates when they're in college. It'll just be single rooms only because of the recent pandemic.
But you're finding that most of the colleges are going to have students on campus to some degree.
I wouldn't say all. I would still say it's probably around 50-50 because so much of it, Lee, is going to be dictated by the policies of their states. And so whatever the state guidelines are, and sure, they can say for now that, yes, they do plan for, perhaps half of the student body to be on campus in the fall, but it's not confirmed just yet that will be the case. And so many of them are planning for contingencies.
Now, for the kids that are in high school, I would imagine that's where you spend a lot of your time, right? Working with students that are in high school. How are you kind of coaching them about like extracurricular and some of these, non-test, non-grade related activities that are so important in getting into colleges nowadays?
What I am sharing with students is to still engage in those activities virtually. And so like a number of students will participate in some type of volunteerism or community service, for example, where there are hundreds of thousands of opportunities to volunteer online now. And I will usually, talk with them about, just kind of looking at some of those opportunities where they can still be engaged, still be involved, even though they're doing it from home. If a student, for example, is interested in participating in a summer program, there are summer programs that are, still being done virtually, where they have an online community of other peers. They're still delivering some really good content in the way of if it's something pre-professional or something academic. And so they can still get those social interactions as well as the accountability in a summer program, doing it virtually. And so I'm not telling students to just forget it and throw it out the window at all, but to be creative and look at ways that they can still participate and do it virtually.
Now, in your business, were you primarily doing this kind of work face-to-face and in person? And now you've had to shift maybe yourself into a virtual online kind of interaction?
Well, I was certainly meeting with some students in person that were in my local area. But for many of my families that I work with, they are in other parts of the country and other parts of the world. And so I had already been doing a lot of work online before this crisis happened.
So it was pretty easy for you to kind of shift.
Yes, it was. It was. The thing, though, that was a bit different in terms of my shift was that I really focused more on the mental health support in a more intentional way than I had prior to the pandemic. And what I mean by that is throughout the spring, I had more ongoing meetings with students, more touch points, because my students are spread out in terms of the schools that they're attending. It meant that in some cases, some of my students weren't having any contact with their school. Perhaps they were getting just a packet by email. And so I felt, a deep responsibility to then make sure that I was that continuity for the student in terms of setting up additional time to connect with them, to hold them accountable, and to check in on their mental health. Part of, them, just taking care of themselves is also having a routine and having some social interactions and really taking that time to reflect, to be grateful, to be mindful. And those same practices that I had been using all along, it was more intentional and more related to just how to help students navigate this new experience where it's completely unscheduled. And oftentimes they felt like there was so much uncertainty about what's next for them. And so keeping them uplifted and encouraged. And also at the start of each meeting, we were doing a gratitude practice, which I continued through the summer. And that's been very empowering for students. And so adding that mental health component to my work was the biggest shift, if you will.
Now, do you find that this is probably for a lot of students and their parents, the first time that they've had to really be this intentional and self-directed? And like you said, this lack of structure that maybe they had taken for granted over the years has now kind of been placed on them. Do you have any tips for the parents to help the student become just better at kind of managing their own time and having the self-discipline in order to do the work and to do the grind that they have to do in order to be successful when there is a lot of this kind of untetheredness going on?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely, Lee. One thing that I would suggest is establishing some routines. That's very important to, learning how to be more independent and self-directed in terms of whatever they need to get done. Setting up routines is key. Another one is nurturing relationships that they have. And so really taking advantage of this time to be a better son, to be, a better brother, but taking care of those relationships that they have at home, and also friend relationships, still making time for friends, whether it's through FaceTiming them or even doing some kind of Zoom party with friends is a way to also, learn some of these skills. But those are two key ways that I would suggest. And it's about building resilience, learning how to be resilient through a time like this. And much of what they're learning now are skills they're going to carry with them the rest of their life, not just only in college, but even beyond, in terms of being resilient and adapting through this time. And so those are a couple of key ways that they can start to do that.
Now, let's talk about your clients that are companies and organizations. Do you have any advice for them in order to be maybe more empathetic to some of their employees who are having to deal with a lot of their kids at home that maybe they hadn't been used to previously, to especially to this degree, and especially if the schools aren't opening up and it's more of an online experience and they're going to have to do this homeschooling? How can the company be more supportive to those folks?
Oh, wow. Couple of ways is certainly going to be flexibility in terms of the scheduling. And companies are going to have to realize that with students still having some part remote and some in-person classwork, that parents, are going to be taking on more responsibilities at home in that regard. And so being flexible and understanding, what the demands are going to be on their time. And I have, Lee, worked from home for about over the last 25 years now. And so I know that it's something that doesn't come as easy as some people may think it does. And certainly now with this pandemic, parents have realized that, wow, to be able to focus on work and then also be able to handle interruptions and deal with your kids and questions that come up, that can be a challenge. And it can be hard to sometimes separate work from home and vice versa. And how do you support your employees with still being able to navigate that? And so companies are going to have to be more flexible in terms of how, they even support the work life of their employees, provide them resources as well for being able to still be productive at home and while having their children at home. That's certainly going to be a test in the summer and then through the fall when students are returning back to their classwork. But flexibility, understanding, providing resources for them to navigate that work-home balance are going to be important for companies to do going forward.
Well, if there's a company out there that wants to get some creative ideas on how to serve their employees that are parents, or if there are parents out there that want to help their teenagers kind of take their educational career to the next level, what is the best way to learn more about Dr. Pamela Ellis and her work? Is there a website?
Absolutely, there's a website. I can be found at CompassEducationStrategies.com. My blog is called TheEducationDoctor.com. And I have another site, which is CompassCollegeAdvisory.com. And so there are a number of ways that they can find me online. I also have a Facebook group that has been really reignited, if you will, through this pandemic, because we've been providing so much rich content and resources for parents to just get the help that they need. I've been doing classes each week, live classes through Facebook, just sharing with them really rich content to help them with, how do I, know which colleges to have on my kids' list and what things we need to do in the way of, helping them through this crisis. I created a tool called the College Bound Survival Toolkit, and it's for parents who have teens 8th through 12th grade to get just a number of resources bundled. It's a free resource, and it has things like, a FAFSA checklist, so how to complete that, because for families who are thinking about applying for financial aid, they still have time to do that if their teen is enrolling in the fall. And for students in the class of 2021, their families will be filling out those forms in the fall. And so just tools like that, a roadmap to know what to do each month and how to support your kid, reading lists. So all of those things are within the toolkit, and families can certainly get that toolkit if they go to theeducationdoctor.com, and that'll be a lot of resources for them right there.
Good stuff. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
I absolutely appreciated it, Lee. Thank you for having me on.
All right. This is Lee Cantor. We will see you all next time on Dayton Business Radio.